it's Maz again. So today I'm going to do a bit of a sewing machine 101. So the aim of this tutorial video is to just take you on a whistle-stop tour of getting to grips with your sewing machine. This is mainly aimed at people who might perhaps not have been using a sewing machine for a long time or have never used one before. And it goes over a lot of very basic stuff, such as how to load a bobbin to go into your sewing machine so that you can sew with it, how to thread up your sewing machine so that everything is in the right place to try and minimise the problems that can be encountered when the sewing machine isn't threaded up correctly, how to determine the correct tension for when you're sewing your fabric. This can be a little bit of a mystery to some people, so hopefully I'll be presenting a simple method of determining what tension you need to use. I'll also be talking about some really simple things like how to sew in a straight line, how to debulk seams and corners in order to make your fabric turn inside out more easily, the different stitch settings that you can do, such as straight stitch and zigzag stitch, how to back stitch your line of sewing in order to secure it, and just a couple of other little things like the different types of feet that you can use for your sewing machine, the different types of needles that you can use according to what fabrics you're using, as well as pinning your fabric prior to sewing it, and how to determine the correct seam allowance. There's quite a few other little tidbits that I mentioned throughout the tutorial video. So if you have any questions or any feedback for me, do just drop me a message or leave a comment, and if I get a response saying I'd like to know more about X, Y or Z, then I can add to this video or re-record some sections of it. So let's get started. First things first, let's have a little talk about bobbins. So your sewing machine has two threads going through it. It has a thread from the spool thread that sits at the top of the sewing machine, and then you also have thread coming from the bobbin, which sits in the section underneath the sewing machine. So there are lots of different types of bobbin, and you need to make sure that when you're purchasing a bobbin that it's the correct one for your machine. So to demonstrate that, this is a metal bobbin. These are nice and durable. Obviously once they get a bit bent they're not good for much, but they are pretty rugged, and they're also a little bit more expensive. And then you have plastic bobbins, which are cheap as chips, cost about like 30 or 40 pence each. Just buy a whole bunch of them because you're going to have lots of different thread colours loaded onto these, and it's really annoying to have to take a whole load of thread off a bobbin that you already have in order to put a different colour thread on it. So just buy a whole bunch of them, it's totally worthwhile. But the metal ones are probably a slightly better investment in the long run, because these plastic ones, they do break after a while or get a little bit cracked, and the thread can get caught in them and cause problems. So if you have the money to spend, metal bobbins are probably a better way to go, but if you're just starting out, these plastic ones are just fine. Now the reason why it's important to get a bobbin that is actually the right one for your machine is because if you have a machine that has a bobbin case like this one, for example, this has come straight out of the Brother sewing machine that I'm going to be demonstrating with later, they don't always fit if you get the wrong type. So this is a Brother specific metal bobbin. It fits in there quite nicely. If I pull the thread, it all turns around pretty neatly, and that's all fine. This plastic one here, which is currently empty, also fits in there pretty nicely, no problems there. This other metal one though is a Singer bobbin. So this is not designed for Brother sewing machines, and if I pop that into here, it doesn't actually come back out again. It does if I just kind of tap it, but you can see it's actually gotten a bit stuck, whereas all the other ones just kind of fell out. So if you get the wrong type of bobbin for your sewing machine, then it might cause some problems like it jamming. So always make sure that you've bought the correct bobbin for your sewing machine. So before you actually put your bobbin into the bobbin case, obviously it needs to have some thread on it. So we're now going to talk about how you load a bobbin. Just wanted to show one of my plastic bobbins which actually broke on me last night. So the top part's just come clean off the bottom part. As you can see here, it just snaps straight off. These are just kind of glued together really, so you know, once they break that's kind of it. I've got a lot of thread on here, which I really don't want to go to waste if I can avoid it. So what I'll probably do is try and stick it onto the top spool of my sewing machine and see if I can try and load this thread onto another bobbin. This is the sewing machine that we're going to be having a go with today. So this is a Brother. It's an XL5500. It's a pretty reasonable entry-level sewing machine. It doesn't have quite the same limited set of options that some of the really budget Brothers have, but basically it does everything that you would want it to do for making your costumes. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to have a look at the top of the sewing machine and talk about how we load a bobbin. So, going up onto the top of the machine, you can see there's two things here that are attached to the machine. The first bit is the thread spool. So your cotton for your sewing goes on top of here. So this is just some regular Gutermann sewing machine thread. So Gutermann are a really good brand. Their thread is not cheap and nasty. It's not going to snag up and knot inside your sewing machine and make you sad. It's the spools of cotton cost anywhere between £2.30 and £3.80 depending on how much thread you're buying on a spool. It's really worth the investment because working with cheap thread is just so frustrating in the long run. So once you've got your thread on your spool, you then want to actually pop your bobbin onto the bobbin loader here. So this goes back and forth like so. What you do is you pop your bobbin on here. So when you pop it on, there's a little bit of wire here. This bit of wire stops the bobbin from flying off when it's being loaded, so you just pop it on and then you turn this into the loading position. Okay, so by doing this you are disengaging the sewing machine motor from the sewing machine needle, which is down here. So if I turn the dial at the side of my sewing machine, which operates it manually, the needle isn't moving at the moment, and the reason for that is because of me having disengaged it. So at the top here you can see when I move the needle, what happens instead is that the bobbin loader spins around. So having done this, we're almost ready to start loading our bobbin. The next thing we need to do is to get this thread from the spool onto the bobbin. But if we were to actually just wind this around like so and start loading it, terrible things would happen, which I'm not going to demonstrate because my sewing machine would be very sad. So what you do instead is you have to generate enough tension on the thread by actually winding it through a tension mechanism here. So this bit here is called a thread guide. When you're threading up your sewing machine for actual sewing, you would normally put your thread from the spool through this, but we're not actually using that at the moment because what we want to do is to load the bobbin. Now on this sewing machine there's a nice nifty little set of instructions showing you how to use the thread guide, or rather skip over the top of it and go to the little knob at the top to load your bobbin. So what we basically need to do is get this line of thread here and pop it on, wind it round like so, and there we go. So now the thread is following the dotted lines that are shown on the diagram here. So it goes round, curves on top of itself, and then goes this way. So that's the point of that. Now, having done that, you then want to load your bobbin. Now, there's two different ways of doing this. The way in which I do it is to just actually manually wind this around the bobbin a couple of times. But another thing that you can do, which is what the tiny little hole on the top of your bobbin is for, is you can actually thread the thread through that, which will get it started more quickly. So here's the cotton threaded through the little hole in the top of the bobbin. So now, when I press the presser foot, which I've just got here, it's not quite down on the floor yet, I'm just using it for the sake of loading the bobbin, make things a little bit easier. If I press the presser foot now, that's the bobbin loading. You see it's going up and down. So this is a system that's used by the machine to make sure that the bobbin loads evenly. Now you don't want to overload your bobbin. If you put too much thread on it, it won't go into the bobbin case properly. So I'm going to stop about there. Now if you have a look at the side of this, you can see that this hasn't actually loaded very evenly. So there's more thread on the bottom than there is on the top. And the reason for that is because my sewing machine is quite old. There's a little plastic bit that's supposed to live here, and that's what actually leads to your bobbin being loaded nice and evenly. And what I normally do when I'm loading the bobbin is I actually flip the thread up and down when it's loading manually in order to make sure that you've got an even coverage at the top and the bottom, but obviously I'm in the middle of filming, so I haven't done that. So if you have a fully functioning working sewing machine, which I'm sure you will do, having gotten yourself a nice new one, you would normally have this bit here. And what the plastic bit actually does is that as the bobbin gets fuller and fuller, it will actually push this into the off position. So you don't generally have to worry about accidentally overfilling your bobbin, because the little plastic bit here will stop that from happening. So that's the bobbin filled up, and now you can actually get rid of all of the thread that's been threaded through here, and you can actually have a go at threading up the sewing machine properly.